In January 2025, a 28-year-old surfer named Lance Appleby was killed by a great white shark at Granite's Beach on the Eyre Peninsula in South Australia. It was the fourth fatal shark attack in that region in 20 months. 12,000 miles away in the southern Maldives, there is an island where this should be happening constantly. 250 tiger sharks live in its waters year-round. Divers enter alongside them more than 12,000 times a year. Tiger sharks are the second most dangerous species on Earth, and in the entire recorded history of that island, not one person has ever been attacked. That cannot be explained by luck. Something structural is producing that outcome, and the island is the first piece of it. Fuamula is a small island in the far south of the Maldives. It sits almost 100 kilometers from any other landmass, alone in the open Indian Ocean. And geographically, it is not like the rest of the country. While the other Maldivian islands are built around wide, shallow lagoons where the water near shore rarely exceeds a few meters in depth, Fuamula is different. Just a few hundred meters off the beach, the seabed collapses into a near vertical cliff that plunges from 10 meters to 500 and keeps dropping past 2,000. And so the deepwater animals that usually live far out in the open ocean, tuna, marlin, and the large predators that hunt them, can reach this island's reef within swimming distance of the shore. That includes tiger sharks. But the geography is only half the reason they're here. The other half is the harbor. Fuamula's harbor was built in 2004. Every day, fishermen there bring in yellowfin tuna, and every day, the scraps end up in the water at the harbor entrance. As a result of this practice continuing for over 20 years, the sharks have learned that this specific patch of seabed at this specific time of day reliably produces food. That patch of seabed, 6 to 9 meters deep, sandy, and easy to access by diver, is known locally as Tiger Harbor. And what happens there is the reason we're having this conversation at all. In December 2016, a research team began photographing the tiger sharks at Tiger Harbor. Over the next 7 years, they identified every individual animal they could by its fin shape, stripe pattern, and body markings. Work that eventually became the world's most detailed photo identification database for a single tiger shark population. By the end of the study, they had cataloged 239 individual tiger sharks at a single dive site. That number is already the largest known tiger shark aggregation in the world. And locally, operators say the real figure today is closer to 300 because the photo ID database has kept growing since the research was published. However, of those 239 sharks, 202 were female, more than 84% of the entire population. Every shark measured above 3.5 meters was female. The largest animals, the oldest, and the ones that returned most often were all female. And the finding was so unusually skewed that the researchers verified it with a standard statistical test to rule out sampling error. One individual in particular stands out. A shark cataloged as F011 was recorded on 128 separate encounters across multiple years, not passing through, not dropping in occasionally, but returning to this same 6-meter patch of seabed again and again. She was not unusual in that. Across the 7 years of data, almost 2/3 of the identified sharks were re-sighted in at least 2 different years, and more than 1 in 5 were seen across 5 years or more. These animals had chosen this place, and the number of them was growing, even as the number of divers entering the water with them grew alongside. 11 dive centers now operate at the harbor, up from 1 just a few years earlier. Around 12,000 human entries into the water per year, every year, at the same 6-meter patch of seabed that 250 apex predators call home, and not a single attack across any of it. This runs counter to a common assumption about dangerous animals, that a group of them is more dangerous than one, because more competitors around a food source usually means more unpredictable movement and more opportunities for something to go wrong. At Fuamula, the opposite is true, and we know this because in early 2025, a separate research team published a study that had never been possible to do anywhere else. Over 7 months of observation, the team watched 40 mature female tiger sharks at Tiger Harbor had found something that had never been documented in this species. The sharks were operating within a structured social order based on body size. Larger animals consistently gave way to each other rather than competing for the same position, while smaller animals deferred to larger ones without any of the aggression that would normally be expected around a reliable food source. That finding reframes everything. A social hierarchy only exists in animals that can recognize each other as individuals, and animals that can do that can also recognize what else is in their environment, what is a threat, what is prey, and what is neither. These sharks had long since categorized the divers above them as neither. That is why predatory behavior had never surfaced in 7 years of constant human contact. So the question is no longer why these sharks have not attacked anyone, because the behavioral evidence now tells us they are nowhere near a state of predatory arousal. The question is, what has put the largest gathering of tiger sharks on Earth into a state of sustained collective calm? And the answer came from a piece of equipment that had never been used on wild sharks before. In May 2024, Dr. James Sulkowski from Oregon State University's Big Fish Lab arrived at Fuamula with a high-definition submersible ultrasound, which had never been deployed on wild sharks in open water before. Over 10 days, his team observed 69 female sharks at Tiger Harbor and successfully scanned 36 of them. 26 out of 28 adult females scanned were pregnant, which works out to 93%. The scans also revealed that the embryos were at 2 different stages of development, which meant the females were arriving at different points in their pregnancies and staying throughout gestation. This was the first time a gestational aggregation of tiger sharks had ever been confirmed anywhere in the Indian Ocean. That single finding reframes everything about the site because it explains the dominance hierarchy, the female skew, the year-round site fidelity, and the zero attack record all at once. The photo identification data from the earlier study now lines up with it completely. Adult females spent an average of 60 days at Fuamula, then disappear for around 97 days to give birth somewhere else before returning to start the cycle again. Over the 7-year study, 54 pregnancies were recorded across 39 individual animals, with the same females cycling back roughly every 2 years. FO11, the shark photographed 128 times, was one of them. Every 2 years, she came back pregnant. Fuamula is not a feeding ground with sharks in it, it is a maternity ward. A pregnant tiger shark is not a standard tiger shark because her entire body is optimized for this window of her life to do as little unnecessary hunting as possible. She moves slowly, forages predictably on a food source she already knows, and avoids unnecessary confrontation because every calorie she spends on something other than carrying her pups is a calorie she cannot afford to lose. That means when a diver appears in the water above her, she is not tolerating them. She is not being tamed. She has already made a calculation, one her biology has been making for millions of years, that the diver is not worth the calories. Her body is doing something extraordinary, and she is doing it exactly 2 meters from the diver's face. The reason nothing has ever happened at Tiger Harbor is not that these sharks are friendly, it is that they are busy. And what they are busy doing is more important to them than the humans around them. There's still one piece of this picture that science has not filled in, which is where these sharks go to give birth. For 97 days every 2 years, the females disappear into the Indian Ocean, and no acoustic tags or satellite trackers have yet followed them. Somewhere out there, there's almost certainly a second site as important as the one we already know about, and nobody has found it. The explanation is credible, but not yet complete, and that incompleteness matters more here than at any other dive site in the world, because the same basic setup has produced very different results elsewhere in the Maldives. The tuna heads are not a neutral food source. Using bait to attract sharks for tourism is technically illegal under Maldivian law, though the tourism ministry has declined to clarify how that applies to Fuamula. And the volume is not small. A 2024 review found that during peak season, roughly 100 kilograms of tuna heads enter the water every day across the 11 operators. The sharks are not hand-fed, The bait is hidden under coral rubble, so the animals forage naturally. But the quantity matters. When operators had previously used marlin and sailfish heads instead of tuna, the sharks became noticeably more active and more aggressive. That is why all 11 operators now restrict themselves to tuna. This system is not passively safe. It is safe because of specific choices about bait type, bait volume, diver positioning, and operator protocol. Change any one of those variables, and the outcome changes. That is exactly what happened 6 weeks before Lance Appleby was killed at Granite's Beach. On November 15, 2024, a tiger shark bit a diver in the head at a site called Hulumale near the Maldivian capital. More than 40 stitches. The diver survived, but barely. And the site was not Fuamula, it was a different location, a different operator, using illegal bait with none of the regulation that exists at Tiger Harbor. The diver was wearing an orange and white neoprene hood patterned to resemble a clownfish, and investigators considered the colorful hood a likely triggering factor. That incident is routinely misattributed to Fuamula in online reporting, which is wrong. And the distinction matters because it tells us the zero attack record at Tiger Harbor is not proof that tiger sharks are safe to dive with. It is proof that these tiger sharks in these specific conditions have not attacked. The Fuamula record is real, but it is also conditional. And that conditionality raises a question the local dive industry has been quietly debating for years, which is what happens to the safety record if the tuna waste stops. Some researchers believe that removing the food subsidy would simply disperse the aggregation, with the sharks returning to ordinary roaming behavior along the reef wall. Others believe the opposite, because withdrawing a predictable food source from a population that has relied on it for 2 decades could produce foraging behavior the island has never seen. Nobody has tested this because nobody wants to be responsible if the second hypothesis turns out to be right. So the conditions hold for now, and the conditions themselves are still not a complete explanation, because there is another island in a completely different ocean where the same pattern holds, and there is no tuna harbor. If this explanation is right, the pattern should show up anywhere the same conditions exist, and it should break down anywhere they do not. There's one other place on Earth where researchers have been documenting the same thing, and there is a stretch of coastline in a different ocean where every one of these variables is reversed. If Fuamula is a rule and not a miracle, both places will tell us so. Norfolk Island is a small Australian territory in the South Pacific, roughly 1,400 kilometers northeast of Sydney. It has no dive tourism, no structured bait operation, and no harbor feeding arrangement. What it has is a research team from Flinders University and James Cook University that, between 2020 and 2023, satellite tagged 35 tiger sharks in its waters. The females averaged 4 meters in total length, which is around 0.6 meters longer than tiger sharks measured on the Great Barrier Reef, and translates to over 70% greater body mass. The sex ratio was 9-to-1 female, the same skew as Fuamula, and 88% of tracked sharks returned to Norfolk Island across multiple seasons, which is the same site fidelity. For years, people assumed the sharks came to Norfolk Island because farmers had historically dumped dead cattle off a coastal cliff into the sea. It was a tidy story, and it made for compelling television, but it was mostly wrong. Stable isotope analysis of nearly 100 sharks found that cattle contributed only about 10% of their diet, and the dominant prey, accounting for around 73% of what these sharks eat, was seabirds. Specifically the wedge-tailed shearwater, which rests on Norfolk Island in the hundreds of thousands during the same months the sharks are present. At dusk, the birds raft on the ocean surface in enormous groups, and a tiger shark approaching from depth in low light can pick them off before they even react. So the food source is different, the ocean is different, and the country is different, but the pattern is the same. Female-dominated, site-faithful, gestating animals with a reliable food supply and a zero attack history, going back to 1892. The only recorded incident in Norfolk Island's history is a non-fatal laceration to a fisherman's arm 133 years ago. Researcher Adam Barnett, who works on the Norfolk population, put the principle in one sentence: which is that predators are normally lazy. An apex predator with a reliable, predictable food source has no incentive to expend energy investigating anything else, which means the investigatory drive that can lead to a bite drops off sharply when the animal's energy demands are already being met. That is not a description of a single site. That is a description of how these animals work across the planet. That tells us that the tuna harbor at Fuamula is not the cause of the zero attack record. It is a local version of something more general. The real conditions are abundant food, gestating females, site fidelity, and a predictable routine. And Fuamula just happens to have all of these in concentrated form. They exist elsewhere, and where they do not exist, something very different happens. The 4 attacks on the Irie Peninsula were not committed by tiger sharks, they were committed by great white sharks. And that species distinction is where the thesis holds or collapses. Because if the Fuamula explanation depends on life history, food supply, and behavioral state, then a site where all of those variables are reversed should produce attacks, which it does, and the mechanism behind those attacks is now well understood. A great white shark is not a cruiser. It is an ambush predator that evolved to hunt marine mammals, seals, sea lions, fur seals, primarily through vertical attacks from depth, positioning below its target in low visibility water, using speed and the element of surprise, and striking with enormous force. Its musculature is built for explosive bursts, and it can breach fully out of the water, which makes it a completely different animal, behaviorally, from the tiger sharks at Fuamula. And its hunting template produces a very specific, very well-documented visual problem. In 2021, a research team published a landmark study in the Journal of the Royal Society Interface in which they filmed pinnipeds, human swimmers, and surfers on boards from below, replicating the exact perspective of a hunting shark, and then digitally filtered the footage to match the visual system of a juvenile great white. Limited resolution, no color, motion cues dominant. The motion signatures of a paddling human and a seal with flippers extended turned out to be statistically indistinguishable. That finding is the mechanism, and it explains why surfers are the highest risk group for fatal shark bites, especially from juvenile white sharks that are transitioning to pinniped prey and still learning to hunt, because they are running a visual template that cannot discriminate between a seal and a person on a surfboard from 20 meters below. And the geography of the Irie Peninsula places surfers directly in the path of animals running that template. The Neptune Islands, 60 to 70 kilometers offshore, host Australia's largest long-nosed fur seal colony at around 40,000 animals, and the great white sharks that hunt them are not residents of any beach. CSIRO tracking data documented individual animals traveling more than 12,000 kilometers from South Australia to sub-Antarctic waters and back, which means they're passing through and hunting, and Granite's Beach sits directly on the route. One shark is moving fast through deep water, hunting by silhouette in low light on a transit between seal colonies and encountering something that looks exactly like its prey from below. The other is gestating in shallow, crystal clear water with a known food source 2 meters away inside a social hierarchy it navigates daily, ignoring a species it has encountered thousands of times. These are not two versions of the same danger. They are two completely different ecological situations that happen to involve animals that carry the same word. Tiger sharks are, by most measures, the second most dangerous shark species on Earth. They are large, they are curious, they have been responsible for more recorded attacks on humans than any shark except the great white, and they're not generally considered safe to share the water with. There is, however, one place where people do exactly that every single day, and have done so for more than 20 years. A small island in the southern Maldives called Fuamula. 250 tiger sharks live in its waters year-round. 11 dive operators take visitors out to see them, generating more than 12,000 underwater encounters a year in 6 meters of water at close range. In the entire recorded history of the island, not one person has ever been attacked. This is a genuinely unusual fact, and it's not explained by luck. Something specific is happening at this one location that is not happening anywhere else in the world. And over the last 18 months, 4 separate scientific studies have started to explain what that something is.